In this set of slides, we're going to look at the final topic in Unit 4, Area of Study 1, and that topic is chronic adaptations. So what we've done so far is we've looked at training programs, we've done games analysis, fitness testing, training principles, training methods, fitness components, and you've just finished undertaking your 6-week training program. So the purpose of a training program is to develop chronic adaptations to training, and that's what we're going to focus on now. As a result of all of that training and that commitment that athletes make to their training, what are the long-term adaptations that they're getting to their body? What exactly are chronic adaptations? So we'd say chronic adaptations, they're physiological changes, so changes within the way your body functions that occur predominantly in your cardiovascular, your respiratory and your muscular systems, and they occur as a result of long-term training. The other topic that's important to really contrast this with and make sure you have them both under control in terms of how they're different are acute responses, because of course your acute responses are your immediate changes as a result of commencing exercise, changes that occur in your body, and they also occur in those three systems, but they return to resting levels at the end of activity, at the end of rest. With your chronic adaptations, these are not the adaptations that occur directly from commencing exercise. These are the ones you develop as a result of long-term training. And these adaptations don't return to their pre-training levels at the cessation of activity. You will maintain these adaptations as long as you maintain your training. So then once you've achieved those adaptations, you will keep them. We separate this topic into two main sections, and then we unpack each of those sections into a few smaller subsections. The two main sections are the chronic adaptations we develop due to aerobic training, and then we'll also look at the chronic adaptations we develop due to anaerobic training. If we focus on aerobic training at the moment, and this slide gives you a good overview of all of the changes that do occur, if you think of what your aerobic training does, it aims to improve the efficiency of your aerobic energy system. So aerobic training is all about getting your body more efficient at producing ATP aerobically. So all of our adaptations that we're going to look at, either in our cardiovascular, our respiratory, or our muscular systems, they're all essentially resulting in the same thing, which is improving the efficiency of your body to make ATP aerobically. So that might be the quantity of ATP, the duration, well, not so much the duration for aerobic, that's probably more anaerobic, but the quantity of ATP, and most importantly the rate at which you produce it. Because if you can improve the rate at which you produce ATP aerobically, then you can work at higher intensities while still working aerobically. Let's look at our cardiovascular adaptations first. So there's a few of them. First adaptation that we're going to look at is what we call cardiac hypertrophy, which essentially just means your heart gets larger. Now, your heart as a whole, not every aspect of your heart is getting larger. Specifically, the left ventricle size is increasing, so that your left ventricle has an increase in its volume. So your left ventricle gets larger. Hopefully you remember that the left ventricle is the one that passes blood from the heart into the aorta, which services the rest of the body. So it certainly makes sense that an increase in left ventricle size is going to result in greater blood flow around the body. Along with getting larger in volume, the walls of the left ventricle, so the walls down here, are going to get thicker. And if the left ventricle walls are thicker, each time that ventricle contracts, it will contract more forcefully, and therefore it can eject more blood. With increased volume and increased wall size, we'll get a greater volume of blood that's more powerfully ejected from the heart. Therefore, it will provide more oxygen to the athlete to use. And remember, each chronic adaptation we look at, just take a moment to bring it back to how does that increase an athlete's performance. Our next set of cardiovascular adaptations Essentially all link back to cardiac output, I suppose. So if you remember from earlier in the unit, cardiac output is the result of your heart rate times by your stroke volume, so that's the amount of blood pumped around your body per minute. In terms of the cardiac output itself, at rest or at sub-maximal intensity exercise, essentially there's no change. If anything, there could be a slight decrease, but essentially at rest and sub-max, your cardiac output will stay the same. And we'll look at why that's the case in a moment. At maximal intensity exercise, your cardiac output is going to be greater. So at max intensity exercises, you will be pumping more blood around the body per minute, therefore providing more oxygen to the working muscles. With your heart rate, at rest and sub-max intensity exercise, at rest and sub-max, your heart rate is going to decrease. So you'll have a lower resting heart rate and a lower heart rate during sub-maximal exercise compared to pre-training levels. A slower heart rate, we call that bradycardia. You'll also achieve a steady state with a lower heart rate. So when you're working at a steady state, your heart rate will be lower than what your heart rate would be at that steady state for the same intensity prior to training. And you'll also have a faster return to resting levels in your recovery. So your heart rate will return to resting levels more quickly as a result of training. At maximal intensity exercise, there's no change in your heart rate. So your maximal heart rate is essentially your maximal heart rate, and the amount of training you do is not going to change that. In terms of stroke volume, so stroke volume being the amount of blood ejected from the heart per beat, at rest, at submax, and at max intensity exercise, your stroke volume will increase. And as you can see by those figures there, it can increase quite significantly. Why does your stroke volume increase? Well, it increases due to a couple of factors. Your left ventricle has gotten larger, so it's going to fill up with more blood, therefore there's more blood available to pump out of it. You've also got that increase in wall thickness, so the heart's going to eject more forcefully. We say you've got reduced cardiac and arterial stiffness, so your arteries are going to be a bit more flexible. Increased diastolic filling time is important, so remember diastole, or that diastolic filling time, is when the left ventricle is filling with blood. Systolic or systole is when it's emptying, so we've increased the amount of time that it can fill with blood, therefore it will fill with more blood. And that increased cardiac contractility, which I talked about before, which means your heart contracts faster. Not faster, harder. If you come back to cardiac output at rest and submax exercise now, because the heart rate is decreasing, but the stroke volume is increasing, they essentially cancel each other out to result in a neutral change. At maximal intensity exercise though, your heart rate, there's no change as a result of training, but your stroke volume is larger, so therefore at max intensity exercise you will be pumping more blood around the body per minute. We also get some changes in blood flow, blood volume, and to a degree blood pressure. So in terms of your blood flow, as a result of aerobic training, you're going to have decreased blood flow to your muscles at rest and during submaximal exercise. So those muscles are actually working more efficiently, so therefore they require less blood going to them at rest and at submax. You're also going to have decreased blood flow to the heart. Now that's the coronary blood supply, not the blood that is getting pumped through the heart, but the blood in the blood vessels, the capillaries that are providing the heart, being a muscle in its own right, with oxygen. So because your heart is more efficient, essentially it can function with less oxygen, so decreased blood supply to that during rest and submax exercise. At maximal intensity exercise, however, you will have increased blood flow to your working muscles, therefore increasing oxygen supply at maximal intensity exercise. The more oxygen you're getting to the muscles, obviously the more ATP they can make aerobically. With your blood volume, so you do have an increase in your blood volume, and that comes about from an increase in the plasma fluid in the blood, so increased volume of plasma fluid, but also an increased volume of red blood cells themselves. Now remember, your red blood cells are the cells that contain hemoglobin, and therefore they allows them to transport oxygen around your body. So by having more red blood cells in your blood, essentially you can transport a greater quantity of oxygen to your working muscles. So we're saying 20 to 25% increase in blood volume as a result of training. And most of that change comes as a result of increased plasma. It's actually going to take many weeks for you to develop the adaptation of having more red blood cells. As I said before, increased blood volume enables greater stroke volume and also assists in more efficient thermoregulation. The increased amount of hemoglobin on your red blood cells, it also increases its capacity to transport oxygen around the body. So not only do you have more red blood cells, you actually have a greater amount of hemoglobin per red blood cell. In terms of your blood pressure, you can see a decrease in blood pressure at rest and submax intensity. Most typically, that is noticed in people that already have hypertension, high blood pressure as a condition. Sort of less dramatic in people that already have a normal, healthy blood pressure. At max intensity exercises, there's no change in blood pressure. A couple of other adaptations, and this will finish us off for the cardiovascular adaptations. Not so much performance related, but as a result of aerobic training, this is a bit more health related. You will decrease the amount of what we call low density lipoproteins and increase your amount of high density lipoproteins. So your low density lipoproteins are sort of your bad ones. They carry cholesterol and deposit that on the walls of your arteries, causing plaque to build up, which affects blood flow. Whereas your high density lipoproteins are your good ones. So what they do is they actually remove the plaque from the artery walls. This one is performance related. So as a result of aerobic training, you will decrease blood lactate concentration, so less blood lactate in the body, which correlates to less hydrogen ion buildup in the body. And you'll also increase your lactate inflection point. So you've got a lower concentration of lactate in the blood, and you've also increased your ability to get rid of lactate hydrogen ions at the same rate as they're being produced, so you can work aerobically for longer, which of course is beneficial to performance because that further delays the build-up of byproducts that are associated with greater contributions by anaerobic energy systems. Moving on to our respiratory system adaptations now. So some adaptations you get to your respiratory system are structural, whereas our other ones are functional. In terms of our structural adaptations, at rest, you're actually going to have an increase in all of your lung volumes. Not that we break down what all of those different vital capacity and different lung volumes are in Year 12 biology, in Year 12 PE, but you will have an increase in all of them, except you will not have an increase in tidal volume. So aerobic training at rest, anyway, does not increase your tidal volume. By having greater lung volume, you're actually increasing the surface area of your alveoli. So the alveoli capillary surface area is larger, and a large surface area provides more points for gases to diffuse. So that results in an increased rate of diffusion, and that would be of carbon dioxide and oxygen. At submaximal exercise and at maximal exercise, your tidal volume will increase. So if we look at respiratory rate, ventilation, oxygen uptake, the changes we would see are with your respiratory rate, which is the amount of breaths you take per minute. that would actually decrease at rest and at submax. There wouldn't be a change at max, but at rest and submax you can sort of get away with breathing less frequently in a way. At submax, mostly due to increased tidal volume, and at rest, and also to a degree submax, just the fact that you're more efficient at breathing, and you're more efficient at transporting oxygen to your muscles, so you don't need to bring it in as frequently. Ventilation, which is the amount of oxygen pumped around your body per minute, you would actually have a decreased ventilation rate at rest and at submaximal exercise, once again due to increased efficiency of actually transporting oxygen and the muscles taking it up. At max intensity exercise though, your ventilation would increase because we did have an increased tidal volume at maximal intensity exercise. So if you think pre-training, you've got a certain tidal volume at max intensity and your max respiratory rate. Post-training, your max respiratory rate has not changed, but your tidal volume has increased. Therefore, ventilation being the combination of respiratory rate and tidal volume, it gets larger. In terms of oxygen uptake, most important thing to look at here, essentially at rest and submax there's no change in your oxygen consumption, but at max intensity exercise you are increasing your VO2 max. And the reason you're increasing your VO2 max, so that's your maximum ability to bring oxygen into the body, transport it around the body and use it by your working muscles. So you're better at doing that, you can bring more of it in. That is due to having increased cardiac output, so greater blood flow. Increased ventilation at max intensity, so more oxygen coming in, more oxygen getting transported around. Increased AVO2 difference, more oxygen getting consumed by the muscles themselves. Increased capillarization, increases surface area, allows for greater diffusion. Increased red blood cell volume means you're transporting more oxygen, and then increased rates of diffusion. So all of those things work together to increase your VO2 max. And of course, having a high VO2 max is certainly advantageous to being an aerobic athlete. Our last two respiratory adaptations are pulmonary diffusion and ventilatory efficiency. With pulmonary diffusion, remember pulmonary just means lungs, and diffusion is the movement of gases, in this case oxygen and carbon dioxide. We already said earlier, because of the increased lung volume, we have an increased surface area between the alveoli and capillaries, and that does increase diffusion. So this is simply just sort of stating that fact. So at rest, at submax intensities and at max intensities, you have that increased rate of diffusion. Your ventilatory efficiency is essentially how efficiently you're able to breathe. So obviously the act of breathing itself brings oxygen into the body, but for you to breathe oxygen into the body, you need to change the volumes of your lungs, which is done by muscles in your ribs called your intercostals, and also by a muscle called your diaphragm. Intercostals and your diaphragm are obviously, as I said, they're muscles, so they need oxygen in their own right. By having an increased efficiency in those muscles that enable us to breathe, we can actually send less oxygen to those muscles to achieve the same outcome, to be breathing oxygen in and out. And by freeing up some of the oxygen that would have previously been sent to our breathing muscles, that oxygen is available to get sent to our other working muscles, which increases performance because we're sending more oxygen to our muscles that are aiding performance. Into our muscular adaptations now. So we've looked at our cardiovascular adaptations. We've just finished talking about our respiratory adaptations. Now let's have a look at our muscular adaptations that occur as a result of aerobic training, and there's quite a few of these ones. If you think about the role of your muscles, they are the things that are directly involved in your movement, hence your performance. Your muscle cells are the sites where ATP is getting made and used. So most of these adaptations here link back to how well your muscles can take in oxygen and how efficiently they can use that oxygen to make ATP aerobically to supply it as fast as possible for the working muscles to use. Therefore, you increase your ability to work at higher intensities aerobically. So some of those adaptations are the capillary density, so the density of capillaries that are surrounding your working muscles and also your heart, which is a muscle, that increases. So you have increased capillary density around your working muscles. That will result in more efficient supply and diffusion of oxygen into the muscles and also from carbon dioxide out of the muscles. Mitochondria are the organelles that are inside your muscle cells and all of the cells of your body. And the role of the mitochondria is very much in aerobic cellular respiration, which we call the aerobic energy system. So that's where most of those chemical reactions take place to make ATP aerobically. So we actually increase the size of the mitochondria and we increase the number of mitochondria that are actually in your cells, therefore increasing the sites, I suppose, where aerobic respiration can take place. So you would be producing more ATP and more efficiently. Myoglobin is a protein, so you guys are familiar with hemoglobin, which is an oxygen-carrying protein on red blood cells. Myoglobin is an oxygen-carrying protein in your muscle cells. As you know, oxygen moves from your blood vessels into your muscles. We need something in the muscles for the oxygen to attach to, and that's the role of myoglobin. So as a result of aerobic training, you actually increase the amount of myoglobin in your muscle cells, which increases the ability of your muscle cell to consume oxygen from the blood supply. Other muscular adaptations that we look at would be your oxidative enzymes. So aerobic cellular respiration, or the aerobic energy system, has a series of chemical reactions that have to occur to make ATP. For example, you start with glucose. Glucose gets converted into pyruvic acid. Pyruvic acid gets converted into acetyl-CoA. Acetyl-CoA then essentially gets broken down further into carbon dioxide, into water, and into the ATP that we're trying to produce. Each time one of those conversions takes place, it's a chemical reaction. And chemical reactions in our body are all driven by enzymes, which speed up the chemical reactions. So the enzymes that control the aerobic energy system are called our oxidative enzymes, because another word for aerobic energy system or making ATP aerobically is oxidation, using oxygen. So as a result of training, we actually increase the number of oxidative enzymes, which means we can make that ATP aerobically at a faster rate. Those enzymes live in your mitochondria, and because we're increasing the number of mitochondria, therefore we're essentially increasing the number of oxidative enzymes. If you think of your aerobic energy system, it can use two main fuel sources. So it can use glycogen, which gets broken down into glucose, or the aerobic energy system can also break down triglycerides, which get broken down into fatty acids, and it can use both of those to make ATP. Glycogen is stored in the muscle. Some triglycerides are also stored in the muscle, and that is the immediate supply. So that's the stores that the muscle's going to use first before it goes to the backup stores such as the liver. So as a result of aerobic training, we actually increase the amount of glycogen stored in the muscle, and we increase the amount of triglyceride stored in the muscle. Therefore, having a larger supply on hand in the muscle, it's more readily available to be broken down, and we can produce ATP at a faster rate. Remember, we do store ATP in our muscles as well. We just don't store very much of it. at max intensity exercise, maybe 2 to 3 seconds, and then we've got to resynthesize it. But that storage of ATP, although it is a small quantity, aerobic training will actually increase the amount of ATP that you are storing in your muscle. Last slide of our aerobic adaptations. So our next 3 muscular adaptations due to aerobic training are some adaptations in the muscle fibres themselves, adaptations in our ability to break down fats and glycogen aerobically, and some adaptations in our A to VO2 difference. With our muscle fibres, as a result of aerobic training, you will get hypertrophy of your muscle fibres, so they will get larger, and that will be restricted to your type 1 muscle fibres. They being your slow twitch fibres, the ones you predominantly use to do aerobic activity, so you'll have some increased size in them. You'll also have increased capillary density around your type 1 muscle fibres. We have 3 types of muscle fibres, type 1, type 2A and type 2B. Your type 2s are your muscle fibres that are more significant in your anaerobic energy systems, but your type 2A and your type 2B can take on some characteristics. So your type 2A muscle fibres can take on some characteristics of your type 1 muscle fibres. So essentially that's giving you more type 1 muscle fibres in a way. Your type 2B muscle fibres, they can take on some of the characteristics of your type 2, that should say A, not B, your type 2A muscle fibres. So larger muscle fibres that are responsible for aerobic work being your type 1 is your main takeaway there. Aerobic performance is all about producing ATP aerobically at a fast rate, at the fastest rate you can, to supply it to your muscles. So we actually have an increased ability to oxidize the free fatty acids during submaximal exercise, which enables us to conserve our glycogen stores. So that's what we call glycogen sparing. So normally at submaximal exercise, we would say carbohydrates are your predominant fuel source, because for an untrained athlete at submaximal exercise, it's taking too long to break down fats to provide the cell with ATP. However, as a result of aerobic training and chronic adaptations, you've actually gotten a lot more efficient at breaking down fats to produce ATP, and you can get to a point where you're so efficient at doing that you actually can provide the muscles with ATP at a fast enough rate submaximally to use free fatty acids, and therefore you're not dipping into your glycogen stores until you amp up the intensity a little bit more. So glycogen sparing is due to you having more triglycerides stored in your muscles and having more oxidative enzymes to be able to break them down more quickly. We also get an increased number, size and surface area of the mitochondria, and that is also, so increased number, size, surface area of mitochondria, oxidative enzymes and increases in muscle glycogen stores are also resulting in a greater breakdown of glycogen. So we're more efficient at breaking down fats, and we're also more efficient at breaking down glycogen. Your AVO2 difference, if you can remember, is the difference in oxygen concentration in your arterioles compared to your venules. And that is a great definition to use if you're ever asked a question. Always remember to add this little sentence onto the end of it. It is a direct measure of the oxygen consumption of the muscle. As a result of aerobic training, at submax and max intensity exercise, your AVO2 difference will increase. So there will be a greater difference between the oxygen concentration in the arteries compared to the venules, simply because the muscles will be taking in more oxygen. They're better at extracting it. That is due to the increased size of the muscle fibres, having increased number of capillaries, there's a greater rate of diffusion of oxygen going into the muscles. Increased diffusion and blood distribution to the muscles, along with increased capacity of the muscles to extract and use oxygen, leads to an increase in AVO2 difference. So that increase in AVO2 is actually the result of a number of different adaptations working together.